Does anybody have a question? Uh, oh, the person that have question maybe not be here. Stephen, he's.
He had a.
Oh, awkward. Sorry.
So a question for you, Julie. Obviously, we've talked about our research in the past, and that while you've done some work on how hate speech is encouraged, I've done some work on the unusual practice of users combating and countering hate speech. Have you looked at some of that as well? So, okay, you're seeing hate users are encouraging more toxicity. Did you look at any evidence, or have you started to look at evidence of the opposite?
Of whether, what was the opposite?
Of whether people would, whether reduction toxicity or combating toxicity actually reduces toxicity online.
No, I have not looked into that. I think we probably need a more formal like process of quantifying what is combating actually toxicity, and then to measure the effect of that. I don't know if I can do it with something like that, but I'm sure there's other data sets or other framework of the problem setting that we could look into for combating toxicity in particular.
I had a question for Craig and Mike. In your kind of deployment of this, if you have deployed it, have you thought about or have you seen where questions that have been asked don't get answers back? Like if somebody asks a question and then they don't get an answer back, and then have you thought about maybe how different people will ask the same question and making sure that they get their answer if it's in your database, like kind of like a feedback of like retraining for like the way the same question was asked, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't get a chance to cover that, but in the preparation process, we prepare what's called off-topic intents as well in interview questions. So they'll repeat after us and we'll say, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to answer that. I don't have a good question, or I don't have a good answer for that. That's a great question for a historian. Sometimes they'll add something kind of cute and humorous that matches their personality as well. So that if you ask something like, what is Eric's favorite book he's ever read? And they're like, who's Eric? They'll say, I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that. And then we'll monitor the logs as well. In part of our training preparation, we create variations of the questions, and that provides general guidance to the NLP model, but we'll also see that maybe someone asks a good question and it got mapped incorrectly, but we have a better answer. We add that to the training phrases as well. And so it's regularly, not auto retraining, but regularly retrained for those purposes. The other thing that we're adding down the line on the roadmap is sort of a suggested questions. So people can browse the topics that were asked. And so they may not even realize that Ilyasa has a great story about her mother growing up as an orphan. And then you can like sort of browse the questions and then ask and sort of go down that thread where with a lot of these folks, if you don't know a lot about them, you might know 3 or 4 surface level questions and not realize they answered 200 to 400 or 500 questions and really get into that deeper part of understanding who they are.
A quick question as well for Craig and Mike, and I'm sorry if you said this. How many people have you interviewed, and then how did you choose who you interview?
So we have 3 interviews up currently. They're both through partners that approached us, the Bass Lab, Charlotta Bass Lab. The third one is we did an interview with Craig and one of our colleagues to talk about the services of the digital repository, sort of an experimental one, as a way that outside of the sort of social impact of this, how it can be a useful tool for helping people understand services, offerings at the libraries, other types of things, so you can ask questions rather than browsing through an FAQ. We're working with some folks and hopefully be working with some Holocaust survivors later this summer. This didn't make it in our quick presentation, but this was heavily inspired and done in collaboration with the Shoah Foundation. They've done similar work, and they're sort of taking the torch and continuing what they've done and branching out beyond that. But we'll be working with Holocaust survivors and others as well. It is a paid service through the digital repository, pretty expensive and extensive. And so outside of grants that we're applying for, the interviews that are on there, because we've had clients that have been able to raise funds or have their own funding to have these interviews done and hosted by us.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Oh, Sorry, be thinking here.
This is a quick question for Julie. These are some very important discoveries, and I was wondering whether in the experiments, or is there some methods that can allow us to also understand when these kind of hateful networks are being created and to recognize them as, kind of a vortex of hatefulness one might enter? And also, have you looked at how people, kind of more the dynamics of how people enter those hateful communities themselves? Maybe they connect to somebody at the periphery, and then from then they connect to more and more other people that are connected to them that are also hateful, and then kind of, immerse yourself into the hateful friendships, and then therefore elevate your toxicity. Have you started looking at some of this, kind of the dynamics of getting into hatefulness?
I have not. You could. Actually, very similar in our lab. My colleagues have looked into how people get into coordinated activity or getting into misinformation. Not particularly on hate speech, but I'm sure that's a great idea that someone's going to steal from this talk now, and they're going to work on it.
I think there was one last question.
Hey, Percy. Toxicity sexually motivated, that said that, I got my tongue twisted. You said that toxicity is a motivated behavior. And do we know whether that is motivated by the number of likes versus the virility of other people's responses? It's all of that.
We don't know what people have said in response to them. Like, we don't know if someone replied to their tweet. Like, we just don't have that information through the Twitter data API that we could get from. But our research showed that retweets in particular had a massive effect on toxicity, more than likes. And I think it's because retweets, it's more about, it's not about just endorsement, it's also about broadcasting. So that added an extra layer of maybe incentive or motivation for toxicity driven behavior. So yes, and I think like definitely virality also plays a role in there. I would love to analyze, the text that people show, reply or comment. Fortunately, I just don't have that information, but I'm sure there's a lot of things to analyze from that perspective as well.
I think there are, and somebody gave a talk earlier and was saying how when the TikTok, that's their viral, and other platforms that really it is a reinforcement about how it probably was because it was somewhat moderate.
Yeah, that could be a very interesting way to moderate content if that's what they're doing.
It would, yeah.
I think, maybe they're doing something right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I think we're on poster session 2, and round of applause for our representatives.